Neris counted the candles, because counting kept her hands from shaking. 42 along the high table, 100 more in the iron rings overhead, and every flame leaned the same way in the draught from the great doors, as if even the fire wanted a look at the woman crossing the floor. She kept her chin level. She kept her steps even. She had practiced walking through a crowded room the way other girls practiced music, until it looked like nothing at all. The danger was never the eyes, it was the noses. All around the hall, wolves lifted their heads as she passed, not toward her, which would have been simple, but the way a man turns at a sound behind a wall he cannot place, an unease moving through the crowd like wind over a field. A woman by the hearth frowned at her wine. 2 warriors stopped laughing and looked about for a draught that was not there. None of them knew what troubled them. That was the whole of Neris's safety. They felt the absence of her, and never once guessed its name. Hollow, the old word went. Scentless. The kind the bond cannot hold. Her grandmother had died with that word, cut into the stone above her grave. And the charm at her throat was failing. She could feel it the way you feel a coal cooling in your palm, the borrowed scent of hearth smoke and heather thinning by the hour, and beneath it, the nothing that was truly her, rising to meet the room. She had until the char burned through, an hour, perhaps less. She had come to Greyhold for one thing, and there he stood, exactly where they had said, Lucan. The king's younger brother, loose-shouldered and laughing beside the musicians, the one man in Caldmere said to be kind to strangers. Ask him to dance. A dance was nothing. A dance was a door held open the width of one finger. She crossed the last of the floor before her nerve could cool with the charm, and she made herself smile, and she said it. My lord, would you dance with me? Lucan turned. His whole face opened into a grin. And then a shadow fell between them, and the noise of the hall dropped away in rings like a stone gone into still water, and a voice said, low and terribly certain, he's taken. A breath. Try me. Neris looked up, and up, into the face of the man who had stepped into the space where her whole plan had been standing a moment before. She had feared the king. She had feared him, the way one fears deep water in the abstract, from the shore. She had not known that fear had a jaw like this, a stillness like this. Osric of Caldmere was younger than the stories let you believe, but there was nothing young in how he stood. Where his brother spilled warmth in every direction, the king held his like a banked fire you could feel from across a room and never see. Gray eyes, the gray of a blade left out in weather. And those eyes were on her now, only her, and did not so much as flick away. She knew him at once, of course, everyone knew him. Osric, who had taken the grey crown of Caldmere at 23, over the bodies of the men who had assumed a young king, would be an easy one. Osric, who had ended the border wars not with mercy, but with a thoroughness the ballads still lowered their voices to describe. They called him the hound behind his back, and never once to his face, and the name had nothing to do with his teeth, it was the nose. It was said the king could walk afield the morning after a battle, and tell you which of the dead had died afraid. And now the whole of that terrible attention had drawn down to a single point, and the point was a woman who gave it nothing at all to find. Brother, Lucan said, half a laugh in it, plainly used to being interrupted and plainly not expecting this. I believe the lady asked me. He had not looked away from her once, and now she's asked me. She had not. She opened her mouth to say some small polite thing that would let her slip back into the crowd and out through the servants' door and gone, but the king lifted his hand between them, palm up, waiting. And that was the trap closing, though it wore the shape of courtesy, because 600 people were watching now. To refuse the outstretched hand of the Altha king in his own hall, on the night of the frost moon feast, was not a small rudeness. It was the kind of insult that ended houses. Every wolf in Caldmere would remember the face of the woman who did it, and remembering her face was the one thing Neris could not afford. She had counted on the brother. All the long road north, she had counted on him. Once a year, on frost moon night, The king's brother heard a single petition from a stranger, and granted it, if it pleased him, an old cauldron mercy. A door left unlocked one night out of the cold. Neris did not want gold. She wanted a name, struck from a roll. She wanted the sealed archive beneath Greyhold, opened for 1 hour, and the truth of what the Ravenmore blood had truly done, 3 generations gone, dragged at last into the light, because somewhere in that vault lay the proof that her people had never been the curse the songs made of them. Stop running. One dance with Lucan, one petition. That had been the whole of the plan, and the king had walked through it like a man walking through a cobweb, not even feeling the thing he tore. And to take his hand was to walk straight into the arms of the only nose in the kingdom that missed nothing. She took his hand. His fingers closed over hers, warm and certain, and he drew her in toward him for the first turn of the dance, and she felt the exact instant it happened. She felt the small check in him, the tiny stillness, the way a hound goes quiet when the trail it was so sure of simply stops at the edge of a stream. He had drawn her close, close enough that a mate's scent should have struck him like a struck bell, and there had been nothing there at all. His brow drew down a fraction, his grip did not loosen. And in a voice, pitched for her alone, so quiet the musicians swallowed it whole, the Alpha King said, "What are you? A guest?" Neris said. It was the truth, and it was nothing, and she gave it to him with a small curtsy of the head because a frightened woman looks down, and she could not afford to look frightened. Osric turned her into the dance. He moved like a man who had learned to dance the way he had learned everything, thoroughly and without joy, as a thing that might one day be useful. She matched him. She had learned this too. "You have a name, guest," he said. "Neris." "From where?" "The river country," she said. "Beyond the fens." "You will not have heard of it." "I have heard of everywhere," said the king, and turned her again, and she understood that this was not conversation. This was a man walking the fence line of a field in the dark, testing each post for the one that had been cut. "The river country breeds a certain kind of woman then, one a wolf cannot smell." He said it lightly. He said it the way you set a knife on a table, without threat, only so that everyone knows the knife is there. Neris smiled up at him, as though he had paid her a compliment. "Perhaps my lord has a cold," she said. Something moved behind the gray eyes. Not amusement, the king did not seem built for it, but the near neighbor of it, a flicker of interest where interest was the last thing she wanted to light. She had wanted to be forgettable. She was watching herself become the opposite in his hands, turn by turn, and there was nothing she could do to stop it without making it worse. And they were not alone with it. That was the ruin of the thing. All around the floor the hall had begun to understand what it was seeing, and the whispering had turned, and the current of it ran cold. The king did not dance. Everyone knew the king did not dance. He had refused the daughters of a dozen loyal houses. Refused them so consistently that it had become a kind of law of nature, a thing the season was arranged around. And here he was with a stranger nobody could name, a woman with no house behind her and no scent before her, holding her as though he had reached across his whole court to pluck her out of it. Near the musicians, a woman had gone very still. Sabeth of the Marchword stood with her wine untouched, and her lovely face arranged into something that was trying hard to be nothing. She had worn silver to the frost moon feast. Everyone had known why she had worn silver. Neris watched the knowledge arrive in her, watched her decide, in the space of a single turn of the dance, that a nameless river woman was now the most important problem in her life. This was everything Neris had come here to avoid. She had wanted to be a shadow in a hall full of light, to reach the kind brother, to trade one small favor toward the one thing she needed, and be gone before the char burned out. Instead, she was the center of the room. Instead, 600 wolves were breathing her in and finding nothing, and telling one another so behind their hands, and the word for what she was had been buried a long time, but it was not so deeply buried that no one living remembered where. Near enough to touch, a matron in dove silk leaned to the lord beside her, and the draught carried the words to Neris whole. You feel it, don't you, that cold? My grandmother had a name for that cold. The lord's answer was lost, but the matron's was not. The grey tide, she breathed, and touched the iron charm at her own wrist. They say it always comes in wearing a pretty face. Neris kept dancing. She had heard it all her life in a dozen dialects, and she had learned the only answer was to give them nothing. No flinch, no glance, because a flinch was a confession, and these people gathered confessions the way magpies gather bright things. But she felt the room drawing tight around her like a fist closing one slow finger at a time, and fear, once lit, does not stay in a single hand. She watched it travel, the matron to her lord, the lord to his cousin, the cousin to the pale boy at his elbow. The same small recoil, rippling outward in her wake, until the whole glittering crowd seemed to lean a hair's breadth away from the space where she moved. The music ended. Osric did not let go of her hand. Stay, he said, which was not a request, and turned to say something to a steward, and in the half-breath that his eyes were off her, Neris finally let herself look at the walls, at the doors, at the way out. And by the far wall, beneath the antlers of some long-dead stag, an old man was looking back at her. He was thin and neat and gray as ash, some keeper of the household by his chain of office, and he was not whispering like the others. He was not unsettled like the others. He was looking at her with the flat, patient attention of a man who has found a thing he stopped hoping to see, and his lips had parted. And though the hall was loud, she could read the single word his mouth made across all that distance. Hollow. Neris did not run. Running was for people who did not understand yet that they had already been caught. She had understood it since she was 9 years old, and so she stood, and she breathed, and she let the old man by the wall hold her gaze until he was the one to look away, down, and to the side, toward the king. With something in the gesture that was almost a bow and almost a warning, she filed him away. Holleran, a passing servant, murmured to another, keeper of the old rolls, and she filed that away too. The way you note the location of a blade, you may have to reach for later. Then the king's hand was at her elbow again, and he was walking her from the floor, and the crowd opened before him, the way water opens before a keel. You're frightened, Osric said, not unkindly. Simply, as an observation. The way he seemed to say everything. You are the Alpha King, Neris said. The whole room is frightened. I am only better mannered about it. The near amusement again, closer to the surface this time. He drew her into the alcove beneath the gallery stairs, out of the worst of the eyes, and there in the half-dark, he stopped and studied her, with an attention she felt on her skin, like a change in the weather. I have smelled fear on 10,000 people, he said. Grief. Lies. The precise moment a man decides to reach for a knife. It is the whole of what I am. Do you understand? A nose the pack points at its enemies. My father called it the finest weapon in Caldmere, and he was not speaking kindly of it, or of me. He tilted his head. And I stand here close enough to count your eyelashes. And you are a shape of warmth, and a beating heart, and nothing else. No fear, no falsehood, no truth. Silence. Where every other soul alive is a noise I cannot switch off. His voice did something on the last words that she had not expected. It was not suspicion, or not only. Underneath the testing, underneath the king, who missed nothing, was a man she suddenly understood had not known one moment of quiet in his entire life, and had just, for the first time, found it, and did not want to let it walk back out the door. That was more dangerous than the old man by the wall. Fear, she could survive. This she was not sure she could. They have a word for women like me, she made herself say, because a bold truth told lightly is the best hiding place there is. Your keeper of the rolls was mouthing it just now. Shall I say it for you, and spare us both the game? Say it? Hollow? She lifted her chin. Scentless. Bad luck on 2 feet. The kind that curdles milk and sours a hunt and unpicks a bond just by standing too near it. In the river country they drown us young. When they can catch us, it is a great deal of power to grant a woman who cannot even smell herself. Don't you think? She had meant it to push him back. She had meant to make herself into a superstition, a nothing, a thing too foolish for a serious man to keep. And she watched it fail. She watched him take the whole of it, the word, the drownings, the fear she had wrapped in scorn, and set it down inside himself, with a care that undid her far more than cruelty could have. And yet here you are, Osric said quietly, in my hall, uncaught, walking through 600 wolves as though you owned the floor. A pause. That is not bad luck. That is nerve. From the mouth of the alcove came the bright, deliberate voice of a woman who had decided not to be forgotten. My king, said Sabeth of the Marchword, sweeping toward them in her silver, her smile a lovely blade. You'll introduce me to your friend. The pause before the word did a great deal of work. We are all so curious. She seems to have arrived from nowhere at all. From the river country, said Osric without turning. And she is not my friend. Sabeth's smile widened in triumph, certain she had been handed the dismissal she came for. She is my guest, the king went on, under my roof, under my protection until I say otherwise. See that the household understands it. He looked at last at Sabeth, and whatever was in the gray eyes made her step back a full pace. See that you understand it. It should have felt like rescue. Nerys knew, even as the words settled over the alcove, and Sabeth withdrew, with her face gone white, that it was the opposite. He had not freed her. He had gathered her up. She had come to Greyhold to spend 1 hour unseen and slip away with a single small thing, and instead, the Alpha King had just announced to his entire court that the unreadable woman belonged to him, the most watched, the most guarded, the most impossible to vanish position in the whole of Caldmere. I cannot stay, she said. You can, said Osric. And you will, because a woman who runs from the king's protection on the night he grants it tells the whole hall she has something to hide. The corner of his mouth moved. And you have nothing to hide. You told me so yourself. He raised her hand and pressed it, briefly, to his brow. An old cold Marin courtesy, a lord's promise of shelter, and the touch of his skin against her fingers sent something through her that had no name and no scent and no business existing in a hollow woman at all. Nerys curtsied. She smiled. She said the right words. And over the king's shoulder, through the tall black windows of the hall, she could see the sky above the frost moon feast, and the moon riding fat and pale over the towers of Greyhold, 4 nights short of full 4 nights from the one night in the month when the charm would not be enough. When the hollow rose so high in her that even a lesser nose could catch the empty roar of it, 4 nights, under his roof, under the one man in the world who could not stop listening for the sound she did not make. They gave her the tower rooms above the old mews, 3 floors of cold stone that had not been lived in since the last king's sister died in them. And Nerys understood the message in the choice before the door had even shut behind her. Far from the royal apartments, far from anyone, a pretty cage with a long fall on every side. The maid they sent was a slight, sharp-eyed girl named Wenna, who laid the fire and turned down the bed and did both from as far across the room as the tasks would allow, the way you tend a stall with something unsound in it. She wore an iron charm at her wrist. Half of Greyhold had taken to iron by the second morning. When the girl had gone, Nerys barred the door and did the thing she had done every night since she was 9 years old. She took the small horn box from the lining of her cloak and opened it. Inside lay the char, a handful of black, crumbling sticks, hearthwood burned the old way with heather, and a great many words her grandmother had made her learn before she would teach her anything else at all. She warmed a piece between her palms until a borrowed scent woke in it, smoke and moorland and the ghost of a woman's warmth. And she pressed it to the hollow of her throat, to her wrists, behind her ears, Everywhere a wolf goes looking for the truth of a person. For a few hours more, she would smell like someone, like anyone. There was enough char left in the box for perhaps 9 days. She had known where the next was coming from, before all this. There was a woman in the Fen country who burned it, and asked no questions, and Neris had meant to be back across the fens with her petition won and her own name in her hands, long before the box ran dry. She had not planned to become a king's guest, with iron on every wrist between her and the road home. And there was the other clock, the one no amount of coin could buy her way around. She crossed to the narrow window and looked up, and there it was, fuller than last night, riding clear and cold above the towers. The full moon pulls at every wolf. Each child of the pack feels its tide turn in the blood. But the hollow-born feel it backward. On the nights, the moon comes full, whatever it is in Neris that should have been there, and never was opens like a mouth, and the emptiness of her roars so loud that even a dull nose catches the wrongness of it, char or no char. 3 nights. Now, 3 nights. And then a night when there was not enough burned heather in the world to hide her. She did not expect the knock. It came near midnight, soft, and when she opened the door on its chain, it was the king himself in the stairwell, with a candle, in a plain dark robe, looking less like a crown than she had yet seen him. "May I come in?" Osric said. It was not truly a question. Kings do not truly ask. And yet he waited on the wrong side of the chained door until she had drawn the bar and stepped back, and she noted that too, the waiting, and did not know what to make of it. He did not cross to her. He went to the chair by the fire and sat down in it heavily, like a man setting down a weight he had carried too far, and for a long moment he only breathed, his eyes half shut, and said nothing at all. Neris stood by the barred door, with her heart going hard, and waited to learn what this was. "Do you know what it is?" he said at last, without opening his eyes. "To stand in a room and hear every soul in it at once. The steward who fears me, the cousin who covets, the guard on the stair who ate fish at supper, and is ashamed of a girl he left in the town. I cannot close it. There is no lid on it. Since I was a boy it has been a roar, every hour, every person, 1,000 truths I never asked to know, shouting themselves at me until I would have traded the crown and both hands for a single hour of." He stopped. He opened his eyes and looked at her across the firelight. "And then a woman I cannot smell walks into my hall." Neris understood, then, precisely why she was still alive. "You are the first silence," Osric said. "In 30 years." For a moment neither of them moved, the fire ticking between them. And Neris felt the shape of the trap she was caught in turn over and show its other face. She was not only the king's prisoner, she was somehow the nearest thing to peace the man had ever been given. He did not touch her. He did not ask her to come nearer, or to explain the thing she was, or to be anything at all but what she already was, which was quiet. He sat in her cold tower and let the roar of the whole waking world fall away from him for the first time since childhood. And Neris, who had spent her entire life being the thing that people fled, stood in the strange warmth of being, for once, the thing that let a man rest. It undid something in her that all their cruelty never had. That was the danger of it. Against cruelty, she had armor. Against this, she had none at all. She meant to keep her distance. She meant to hold hard to the truth of it, that this was the one nose in all the world that would betray her the moment the moon came full, that every hour she let him closer was an hour nearer the edge. But the fire was warm, and the king had stopped looking like a drawn blade, and near the end of the long night he drifted at last into a true sleep in the chair, the deep, unguarded sleep of a man who has not had one in years. And in his sleep, he frowned. He turned his face toward her the way a plant leans toward light, and he breathed in slow, and his brow creased as though even in dreams some part of him strained after a thread too fine to hold. "There's something," he murmured, low and lost, and did not wake. Neris sat very still in the dark, Whatever he was reaching for in his sleep, it was her. Not the char, not the borrowed smoke, but the shape of the nothing underneath it. And if the Hound of Codmere could catch at the silence of her even through his dreams, then the 3 nights she had left were no reprieve at all. They were a countdown. By day, Greyhold made its feelings plain. The servants left her food outside the door, rather than carry it across the threshold. The nobles she passed in the long galleries touched iron and found somewhere else to rest their eyes. Twice she heard the word before she had even cleared the corridor. Hollow, always hollow. And once, from an old woman on the chapel stair who did not trouble to lower her voice. Grey tide in the house, and the king too bewitched to smell it. She had learned long ago never to answer any of it. An answer was a handhold. Give them one word back, and they would climb it straight to your throat. So she walked the galleries of Greyhold with her chin level and her hands still, exactly as she had crossed the feasting hall on the first night, and she let the whispers break against her and slide away, and only she knew what it cost to keep her face a shut door, hour upon hour upon hour. It was the loneliest work she knew. It was also the only work that had ever kept her alive. Sabeth of the Marchword was cleverer than the old woman on the stair. She never once used the word. She did not need to. She simply arranged, with the smiling efficiency of a woman who had run this court, in all but name, that the hollow guest should be seen, and seen failing. She had Nerys seated at the high table for the third night's supper in the very place of honor, where the whole hall could study the king's strange favorite at its leisure. And she had the hounds brought in for the carving, the great grey pack-hounds that would fawn on any wolf blood in the room, knowing they would shy from the hollow woman, and show the court plainly what their own noses already whispered. And they did. The instant the pack was loosed, they swept the hall in a wave of wagging delight, and then broke around Nerys's chair like river water around a stone, hackles lifting. A low, bewildered whine running through the lot of them, refusing to come within a stride of her. 600 people saw it. A murmur moved through the hall like wind through barley. And Nerys, with 2 nights' char in a horn box and a moon swelling at the window, sat with her hands folded and her face perfectly serene, and felt the net draw one more loop closed around her. It was the king who broke it. Osric rose, unhurried, and crossed to her chair, and took a strip of meat from his own plate and held it down at her side, and the pack, seeing their alpha, crept in shamed and trembling and took it from his hand at her very feet, whining, obedient, made to swallow what their noses refused. It was not tenderness, it was law. He was telling the room, without a single word, that the hollow woman stood under the king's own hand, and the pack would learn to bear her, or answer to him for it. You did not have to do that, she said to him under the noise. No, Osric agreed, and went back to his seat, and did not explain why he had. But later, in the slow press of the emptying hall, a dry voice spoke at her shoulder. Bred from the old Ravenmoor stock, those hounds, said Halloran, keeper of the rolls, watching the dogs go with mild grey eyes. Funny thing, isn't it? A hound never does forget a blood. It was taught to fear. He turned the mild eyes upon her. I knew a woman once, with a face very like your own. It ended badly for her. Sleep soundly, my lady. And he was gone into the crowd before she could find her tongue. They were not the only ones counting the nights. The stair to her tower ran close along the wall above the council chamber, and climbing it that evening, Nerys could not help but hear the voices raised below, old lords telling their king that a hollow woman kept in Greyhold was an omen the pack would never forgive, that the border houses were restless, that the Marchword had offered him a daughter. Towery of soldiers and asked only that he set the ill luck aside, and she heard Osric's answer, flat and final. One word that shut the whole matter like a slammed door. No, she should have been glad of it. Instead, she stood on the dark stair and understood exactly what that refusal was costing him, and that she was the cost, and that no man alive can spend himself forever on a woman he does not even know is worth the price. That night, the maid Wenna did a thing she had not done before. She carried the supper tray the whole way in and set it on the table with her own hands, and at the door she stopped, twisting the iron at her wrist, and said in a rush without quite meeting Neris's eyes, "They're saying there's to be a rite at the full moon, the old kind that we've not had in my life, nor my mother's before me," she swallowed. "I don't hold with the things they say of you, my lady. You've been nothing but gentle to me. I only thought you'd want to know it's coming." And she was gone before Neris could thank her, or ask the one question that mattered. Coming for whom? 2 nights. That was all that stood between her and the moon that would strip away the last of her disguise and do Sabbath's work for her before the entire court. 2 nights to find the proof buried beneath Greyhold, that her blood had never been the curse they named it, before the curse they named it saw her dead. She could not sit and wait on a boon that might never come now. She would have to go down to the sealed archive herself, in the dark, and tonight. She did not yet know that she would not be the only one down there. The way down was older than the castle standing on top of it. Greyhold had been raised on the bones of something far more ancient, and the archive lay deep in its roots, down a disused servant's stair, through a cold storeroom, along a passage where the walls changed from cut block to living rock, and the air turned mineral and still. Neris had spent 3 days building the route in her head out of a laundress's idle chatter. She went barefoot, her boots in one hand, the char freshly warmed at her throat, though there was no living soul down here to smell her. Or, so she believed, until she saw the light. It came from the archive itself, a thin seam of candlelight beneath the great iron-banded door, which should have been locked, and was not. Voices came with it. Neris pressed herself flat to the cold rock, and did not breathe. "Cannot simply have her killed, whatever you would like," Halloran was saying, in the patient tone of a man explaining sums to a slow child. "The king has claimed her before the whole court. Kill her by hand, and you make a martyr of her and a murderer of yourself, and he will take Greyhold apart, stone by stone, to find the second one. No, it must be the law that does it. The law he cannot argue with, then use the law." Sabbath's voice, cold and fast, stripped clean of all its court honey. "The full moon right. The whole pack assembles. The whole court looks on. You said it yourself. The hollow cannot hide what she is when the moon is high, so let them all smell it at once. Let every soul in Caldmere watch the grey tide standing at their king's right hand. The old law does the rest, and no one's hands are stained, least of all mine." Neris's legs had gone to water beneath her. She had spent her whole life outrunning exactly this, a room full of noses and a law with her name already written into it, and here it was at last arranged for her in the dark by 2 people who never once had to raise their voices. She made herself keep listening. Whatever else was true, she would not die ignorant of the why of it. "And when it is done," said Halloran mildly, "the last child of Ravenmoor goes down into the deep water with the old rite. And every last thing the Ravenmoor line ever knew goes down there with her." A pause. "Including whose grandfather it truly was that burned their halls, and swore to the crown that they had turned traitor. Your grandfather was a thorough man, my lady. But he left the paper. It is behind this very door. And a living Ravenmoor, with a petition and a clever tongue, might, one unlucky day, contrive to open it. Then she dies before she can," said Sabbath. "The Marchward keeps its silver lands, and I keep my king. 2 more nights, old man. See that the rite is ready." Neris's mind was still reeling. The Marchward had not merely inherited the lie about her people. They had forged it, invented the treason that damned Ravenmoor and drowned her grandmother, all to steal a border rich in silver. When Sabbath spoke again. "And the new thing was somehow worse than all the rest." "And Lucan?" Halloran asked. "The brother is fond of the girl. He was asking after her at supper." Sabbath laughed, soft, and for the first time entirely genuine. "Lucan is fond of everything. Lucan will do exactly as I ask him and believe every step of it his own idea, as he has since we were children together. When the hollow woman is drowned, and the king is grieved and stubborn with it, it is his sweet and biddable brother who will steer him, gently, toward the marchward match. I have spent 3 years teaching Lucan to love me. I do not mean to waste him now. Neris stood with her back against the cold stone, and understood, fully, how alone she was. She could not go to Osric. To warn him was to tell him what she was, to hand him out of her own mouth the very truth that would turn the one silence in his life into the omen his whole court swore would ruin his reign. He would not credit the scheme without proof, and the only proof she had was the emptiness of her own body. The moment he truly knew what she was, she lost him, to the law or to the pity, and in the end, the two came to the very same place. Every road she could see led down to the deep water. Beyond the door, a chair-scraped stone. They were coming out. Neris fled, back down the cold passage, up the servants' stair, boots still clutched in her hand, her heart a war drum in her chest, and came around the last black turn of the corridor, straight into a wall of warmth that caught her hard by both arms. "You're shaking," said Osric, out of the dark, his hands closing careful and certain around her bare arms. Seft, haze, a hand's breadth from her own. He could not smell her terror. He did not need to any longer. "Who did this to you? Where have you been?" For one wild instant she thought of telling him all of it. The archive, the right, the forged treason, his brother's borrowed heart, of letting the whole of it come pouring out into the only warmth Greyhold had shown her. His hands were steady on her arms. The entire fearsome weight of his attention was bent on her hurt, as though nothing else in the castle existed. It would have been so easy to trust it. And then the moon slid out from behind a rag of cloud beyond the window and laid its cold light along the floor between them. One night, fuller than the night before, and she remembered precisely what she was, and precisely what he was, and how little time was left to be either. And Neris, with 2 nights left to live, and the whole rotten truth of Greyhold burning a hole behind her teeth, looked up into the gray eyes of the one man in the world. She could not tell, and had no idea on earth what she was about to say. "I couldn't sleep," Neris said. "That is all." It was a poor lie, and they both knew it. And the terrible thing about a man who had spent his whole life hearing the truth beneath every spoken word was that he did not need her scent to know she was lying to him now. She watched him hear it. She watched him decide, for reasons of his own, to let it stand. "Then I'll walk you back," was all he said, and he did, his hand at the small of her back, the whole cold way up the tower stair, neither of them speaking a word, and at her door he waited again on the wrong side of it, until she had gone in and drawn the bar. The next day was the longest of her life. Somewhere far below her, a rite was being made ready, and soon, far too soon, the moon would ride full, and then there would be no char and no charm, and no walking through a room with her chin held level that could hide from 600 noses the great howling nothing of her. She had one day. She spent the most of it at the window, watching the light crawl across the towers, trying to decide whether she would run. She took the horn box out and counted the char by the cold light, as though the counting might change the number, and it could not. 5 sticks, then 6, a scant handful of nights of borrowed scent, and no way over the fens without a horse she did not have. Wenna brought the noon meal and lingered at the door, twisting her iron, and said only, "Whatever it is they mean to do, my lady, don't let them see you afraid." Afraid is the thing they're hunting for. It was the truest counsel anyone in Greyhold had given her, and it had come from a frightened girl with a laundry basket. He came again near midnight, as she had known he would, and sat in his chair by her fire and let the roar of the world fall off his shoulders, and in the quiet, Neris made the most reckless decision of a reckless life. She crossed the room to him. She had spent every night of that long week keeping the width of the floor between them. Now she closed it and knelt by his chair and took his hand in both of hers, and felt him go still as a struck deer. "Bond me," she said, "before the moon. Make me your true mate, not in name only." She told herself it was strategy. A bonded mate of the Alpha King was not so easily dragged to anyone's right. A true bond might be the one wall the old law could not climb over. That was the reason she gave herself. It was not the whole of the reason, and she knew it. She wanted, once, before whatever was coming came for her, to be chosen, to be wanted by the one soul who had ever looked at the nothing of her and called it peace. For a moment his hand tightened hard around hers, and something moved behind the gray eyes that was not refusal, that was the very opposite of refusal. And her heart leapt against her ribs. And then he drew his hand away. "No," Osric said gently, and it was the same word he had given the council. And it fell on her like a stone. "You came into my hall with a secret you are keeping still," he said. "You lie to me about where you go in the dark, and you are frightened past sense of a thing you will not name. And now, on this night of all the nights there are, you ask me to bind your soul to mine forever. No, I will not bind a woman who is terrified and hiding as though I were a thief, snatching a thing before its rightful owner comes back for it." He rose, and his voice had gone rough, in a way she had never once heard from him. "I have spent my life knowing the hidden truth of every soul I pass, whether I wished the knowing or not. You are the single door in all the world I cannot open, and I will not force it, and I will not walk through it while you are afraid of me. When you can tell me the truth of why you came here, and come to me without fear, I will bond you gladly and count myself the most fortunate man in Caldmere. But not before. I will not be one more cage that closes on you." She heard almost none of it. She heard the first hard word and the shape of the rest, and what the shape said to her was, "Not you, not the hollow thing." Even the man who could not smell her, who called her silence the only quiet he had ever been given, drew back from the nothing of her when it came to the moment. She had offered him the whole of herself, and he had stepped away from it, exactly as everyone had always stepped away, and the old drowning shame closed over her head. "Of course," she said, and made her voice level, and rose, and put the width of the cold floor back where it belonged. "It was foolish of me. Good night, my king." He stood a moment longer as though there were one more thing he needed to say, and could not find the door to it. Then he was gone, and the fire ticked low, and Nerys sat alone with the truth she had not been able to give him. And the moon, swelling toward full beyond the glass, she would not wait to be drowned. At dusk tomorrow, before the moon rose, she would be gone from Greyhold if she had to climb down the tower stones with her bare hands. She did not know that Sabbath of the Marchword had already decided she would not be given even that one day. They came for her at dusk, before she could run. 4 of the household guard, with Halloran gliding at their head and a writ in his dry hand that bore the king's own seal, borrowed or forged. It made no difference now. "The rite of cleansing waits on you, my lady," the old man said, mild as milk. "The king's honored guest must be seen to be as clean as any other. You would not wish to seem to fear it." And there it was, the same box he had closed her into on the first night. To refuse was to confess. She went with them, and behind the barred windows of Greyhold, the last red light was draining from the sky. They had made the lower hall into something older than itself. The pack stood assembled along the walls in their human skins, silent, their eyes catching the torchlight. A ring of salt and iron had been laid on the flagstones. Osric sat in the high seat with his jaw set like a man watching a road he did not trust, and when his eyes found Nerys in the doorway, something in them sharpened to a point. He had not ordered this. She saw that at once. Whatever Halloran had told him, the king had not known the shape of it until now. The rite was simple, and it was a snare, and Nerys understood the whole of it the moment Halloran lifted the cup. It was old silver, chased and dented, and the wine in it caught the light too dark. By the old custom, Halloran intoned to the hall, each wolf drinks, and is known. The blood of the pack takes no harm from the moon metal. Only the false, the turned, the ill luck born, only the grey tide fears the cup. He carried it slow and ceremonious, the length of the silent hall, and he held it out to Neris, with his mild grey eyes shining. Drink, my lady. Show us all what you are. The trap was perfect, and it was airtight. Silver, that a true wolf could swallow with no more than a passing sting would show nothing on a hollow woman, no flinch, no burn, no wolf in her to answer it, and the whole assembled pack would see her drink the moon metal like water, and know at last and beyond argument what walked among them. And when they knew, with the moon breaking full through the high windows, even as she stood there, the old law would do the rest, and the deep water waited under Greyhold for exactly this. She looked at the cup. She thought of her grandmother. She reached out to take it, because there was nothing else left to do. Stop! Osric was on his feet. He came down from the high seat in 3 strides, and the whole hall drew breath, and he took the silver cup out of Halloran's hand before Neris's fingers could close on it. You dishonor my guest, he said, low and terrible, and you dishonor me, to make her drink to prove what my own word has already settled. If the cup must be drunk to close your foul little rite, old man, then I will drink it. Her share and mine both. My king. Halloran began, and for the first time the mildness cracked, because this he had not planned for. Osric drank. He drank the whole of it, down in the sight of 600 wolves, and for a heartbeat nothing happened, and Neris let herself think it had been a bluff, plain wine, a scare. And then the cup fell from his hand and rang on the stone, and the king of Caldmere staggered. It was not enough silver to kill a wolf so strong. It had never been meant for a wolf so strong. It had been mixed to a measure that would ravage a hollow woman and merely mark a true one. But it was silver, and it was in his blood now, and it went where silver goes, to the sharpest wolf. Most part of him, the part that had made him the Hound of Caldmere, the finest nose in 3 generations. He went down on one knee, with both hands pressed to his face, and a sound tore out of him that Neris would hear in her sleep for the rest of her life, and when the healers pried his hands away, his eyes were streaming and wide and lost, and he said, in a voice gone, there's nothing there. The hall erupted, and the moon crusted full in the high windows and poured its cold light down over chaos. Guards, shouting. The pack milling and howling. Sabbath's face a white mask of a plan gone wrong, Halloran already melting back toward the shadows. And in all that noise and moonlight, with the vast emptiness of her rising in her blood exactly as she had dreaded, no single soul in that hall was looking at Neris at all. They were looking at their fallen king. Through the churn of it she saw Lucan fighting toward his brother against the press of the crowd, his handsome face wild with a fear that was at least entirely real, whatever else was true of him. The brother loved the king. And she saw Sabbath catch his sleeve and turn him, murmuring, steering him even now, even here, and she understood that the sweet, biddable brother would be told some careful story of this night by morning, and believe every word, as he believed everything she poured into his ear. There would be no help there. There never had been. So she did the only thing there was. She went to him. She got her shoulder under his arm and took his weight. He was a mountain, and he sagged against her like a boy, and she said into his ear, low and fierce, "On your feet, my king. Lean on me. Walk." And because he could no longer read a single soul in that room, because the whole roaring world had gone silent and black to him at once, he did the thing the Hound of Caldmere had never done in his life. He trusted the one person he could not read, and he leaned his whole weight on the hollow woman, and let her lead him blind out of the hall. No one stopped them. A pack in the grip of a broken alpha and a right gone wrong has no eyes to spare for a woman with her shoulder wedged under his arm. They went out through a side door into the cold moonlit yards, while behind them the great hall roared like a kicked hive. And as her bare arm closed around his back, it came into her, through the skin, through the touch, with no scent to carry it, and no wolf in her to feel it, and yet there it was, undeniable, flooding up her arm and into her chest like cold water into a lung. His terror, his grief, the bottomless black horror of a man who has just gone deaf to the only language he ever spoke. She felt it as if it were her own, because, impossibly, against everything her grandmother had sworn, could never happen to a woman like her, it was becoming her own. The bond was forming in a hollow woman, where no bond could ever hold. And she had not the first idea what that meant, except that it was too late now to stop it. They fled Greyhold in the grey before dawn, while the castle still reeled, in a plain cart with two men Osric trusted with his life, north and east, to a holdfast called Highfell, that sat alone on the shoulder of a moor, with nothing around it, for a day's ride, but heather and wind and sky. A wounded king was a challenged king. Every hour in Greyhold was an hour nearer a knife. Osric gave the order in a flat, dead voice, and then said almost nothing for 3 days, and Nerys, who knew a great deal about the particular silence of a person learning to live inside a ruined body, let him have it. Because the loss did not stop at his nose. She understood that within a day of Highfell, watching him, a wolf reads the whole world by scent, friend from foe, truth from lie, the mood of a room before he enters it, the game on the wind, the turn of the weather, the health of his own body. Osric had lived inside that river of knowing since before he could walk, and now it was simply gone, cut off at the root, and he moved through the plain rooms of the holdfast like a man in a fog with a cliff somewhere in it, flinching at sounds he could not place, reaching for certainties that were no longer there. The Hound of Caldmere had been made blind, and no one at Highfell knew how to lead him, no one but Nerys. For here was the thing that undid her when she finally saw it whole. She had spent her entire life in exactly the fog he had just been thrown into. A hollow woman cannot read a room by scent either. She never once could. Nerys had learned, out of pure need, to read the world the slow, hard way instead, by the set of a shoulder, the flick of an eye, the half-second before a smile arrives, the thousand small tells that a scent-drunk wolf never has to learn because the wind does the work for him. It was the discipline that had kept her alive in 100 hostile halls. And it was, she realized, standing in the doorway watching her king grope after a world that had abandoned him. The one thing in all of Caldmere that she could teach him and no one else alive could. So she taught him. The man who brought the water this morning is loyal, but he is frightened for his family in the town. You can see it in how he watches the road, not the door. The older one lies about small things to seem useful. Catch the way his eyes cut left before he answers. You do not need the nose for this. You never did. You only never had to learn. She taught him to read a face the way she read one. She taught him to trust his eyes and his ears, and slowly, to trust her, to let her be the sense he had lost, her hand on his arm, a light pressure that meant friend, 2 that meant careful, 3 that meant we are leaving now. It was not pity. Pity he would have thrown across the room. It was partnership, the plain daily work of 2 people making one whole way of moving through the world. And somewhere in the long bright days of it, the dead flat voice came back to life, and the king began, haltingly, to laugh again. There was one afternoon she would keep for the rest of her days. She had taken him out onto the moor to walk. He would not use a stick, too proud for it, and so he used her, instead, his hand light on her shoulder, and a storm came up off the fells faster than either of them could read it. And they ran for the shelter of a shepherd's bothy, laughing like children, and stood dripping in the dark of the little stone hut, while the rain came down in ropes. "Tell me what it smells like," he said suddenly. "The rain? I am forgetting it already, and I cannot bear that I am." And Nerys, who had never once in her life smelled rain and could not have described it to him, found she could do a stranger thing instead. She took his hand, and gathered up everything. Her eyes and her skin could tell her of the moment. The wet heather, the cold stone, the green live smell of a whole moor drinking, and let it go down the bond into him. Not the scent itself, but the feeling of the world made new, and washed, and breathing. He went very still in the dark. "Oh," he said softly, "there it is." And she understood that between the two of them, the blind man and the hollow woman, the ruined and the remade, they might yet make one whole way of being alive in the world. And one evening on the moor, with the light going gold and long, she told him the truth. Not the whole of it, not the hollow, not the nothing, that door she still could not open even now, but the rest. She told him she was Neris of Ravenmoor. Last of a line the crown had drowned as traitors 3 generations gone, that she had come to Greyhold, not for him and not for his brother, but for the sealed archive beneath it, where she believed the proof was buried that her people had never betrayed anyone at all, that they had been butchered for their silver and slandered to cover the theft. She told him she had meant to win a stranger's boon, and clear a dead name, and vanish, and instead, she had walked into his hall and ruined everything, most of all, him. Osric was quiet for a long while, looking out at the moor he could no longer smell. "The marchword holds the old Ravenmoor lands," he said at last slowly, a man fitting 2 pieces of a broken thing together. "The Silver Country. Spapis' grandfather was given it for loyalty in the traitor wars." His maimed face turned toward her, and there was something terrible and clear waking in it. "Clear your name, and you do not only free the dead, Neris. You unmake the marchword's whole claim to everything they are. No wonder they want you in the deep water." "Yes," she said. "Then we had better reach that archive before they do," said the king, and reached across the gold light between them, and took her hand. And she felt it come through the touch again, the way it always came to her now. Not fear this time, and not grief, but something steadier and warmer, and far more dangerous than either. A thing she did not dare give a name. She did not pull away. Heaven help her, she did not pull away. And that night, for the first time, Neris fell asleep at Highfell, without once reaching up to check the char at her throat, and did not notice that she had forgotten it, which in 9 years of her life had never once happened before. She woke because the light was wrong, not the light in the room, the light in herself. She lay in the narrow bed at Highfell in the thin grey of morning, and knew before she could have said how she knew it, that something in her had changed in the night, some balance shifted while she slept. She lifted her hand to her own throat, where the char should have been, and had gone cold and useless hours ago, and she breathed in, and she smelled herself, heather, cold water, wood smoke, and warm skin, and under it all, a thing that was simply, particularly, unmistakably her, the scent of a person, of a woman, of Neris, rising off her own wrist into the morning air where all her life there had been nothing at all. She sat bolt upright, with her heart slamming. She smelled the wool of the blanket and the ash in the cold grate, and the rain coming in off the moor. A whole, roaring world of scent she had never once in her life been able to reach, pouring into her as though a door bricked up before her birth had been struck open in the dark. She could not stop. She pressed her face into her own forearm and breathed until she was dizzy with it. She smelled the tallow of last night's candle and the iron of the door latch and the particular green of the rushes on the floor. She smelled the horse in the yard 2 floors below and bread baking somewhere, and the vast, wet, breathing world beyond the window that she had walked through. A whole sense, an entire language everyone around her had spoken since birth, while she only ever watched them speak it, the way a deaf child watches mouths move and guesses, and now it was hers. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and wept, for the girl of 9 who had scrubbed char into her skin with shaking hands, for the grandmother who had died with a slur cut into her stone, for every hollow daughter of Ravenmoor who had gone down into the deep water, never once knowing that the nothing inside her was not a curse of the blood at all, but a lock only a lock, waiting the whole of her short life, for the one key the world had sworn could not exist. The hollow was gone. The nothing was gone. She was whole. She understood what it meant even as she wept over it, laughing, both hands pressed to her mouth. Her grandmother's last lore, muttered like a prayer over a hearth, the mark could only lift for a daughter of Ravenmoor, when she was truly bonded, chosen and held by a mate who came to her with nothing to guide him, who could not have been snared by her scent, because she had none, who loved the sheer unproven fact of her. It could not be tricked, it could not be forced. It was the one bond in the world that had to be blind, and Osric had gone blind. Truly, wholly blind, his nose burned to nothing by silver he had swallowed for her sake, and had chosen her anyway. Had loved her with every sense that could have measured her, stripped away, the roar of the world gone silent, nothing left to go on but the plain, unproven truth of who she was. Of course the bond had woken. Of course the hollow had broken. He had done the one impossible thing the curse demanded, and he had done it without even knowing there was a curse to break. She laughed aloud in the empty room, a cracked and joyful sound. He had not pitied her into wholeness, nor bargained her into it, nor even tried to. He had simply, stubbornly, sat in her silence and chosen her, over and over, with nothing to go on and everything to lose, and the choosing had been the key. The entire time, she flew from the bed. She had to tell him that she was whole, that the gray tide was a dead word now, that no right and no old law could ever touch her again, that she was free, and it was his doing, that they could go back and clear her name and live, actually live, in the open, in the light. Together she was halfway across the room with all of it bursting out of her before she had the door open. She did not stop to dress properly, or braid her hair, or think for one instant what she would say. She ran barefoot down the cold passage of Highfell with the whole roaring new scented world in her lungs, and the joy breaking out of her like floodwater through a failed dam, because the only thought in her head was him, that he had done this, that he must be told, that whatever they had spent these weeks running from was finished now, and they could stop. They could finally stop. Osric, Osric, look at me. Something has happened, something wonderful. He was standing at the window with his back to her, and he had gone very still, and when he turned his ruined face toward her, his nostrils flared once, out of an old dead habit. Then his eyes found her, and the knowledge arrived in them, and Nerys watched the wonder in her own heart die as it broke against something in his that she had not expected and did not understand. "You have a scent," he said quietly. "You never had a scent." His jaw worked. So that was the secret. That was the truth. You could not tell me. You were hollow, the thing they hunted, the thing the whole court swore would ruin me. And now you are not. He drew a long breath, and something closed in his face, like a door swinging shut, like a man reaching a decision that costs him everything. Then it's done. Then you're free of it, Nerys. Free of all of it. A beat. Including me, what? The word came out of her in a whisper. Osric, no, you don't understand. It broke because of you. The bond broke it. You. I know exactly what broke it. He said it too calmly. The calm of a man who has done all his shaking on the inside. I have had 3 days to understand what I am now. And one morning, to understand what you are, and the two of them together make a very simple sum. You are the last of a great line, Nerys of Ravenmoor, whole and free and about to be proven innocent before the whole of Caldmere. You have a name worth a kingdom, and a face the court will fall over itself to forgive, and a scent that any wolf alive would cross the sea to follow. And I am a king who cannot smell his own hand in front of his face. A wolf who is not a wolf anymore. Within a season, the strong men of the pack will scent the weakness on me. They already have, and one of them will take my crown and my head, and I will not be able to smell him coming. His voice cracked, once, and he mastered it. You did not bind yourself to me. Circumstance did, fear did. You knelt by my chair and asked me to bond you, because you were about to be dragged to your death. And I have spent my whole life reading the true reasons under people's words, and I will not now pretend I cannot read that one. You do not owe your one free life to the ruin of a man. Go, clear your name, take everything they stole from you, and let me go. And there it was, laid bare at last. Every cold thing he had ever done to her turned inside out in a single breath, and shown for what it had truly been, the refusal by the fire. The nights he waited on the wrong side of a chained door. The one flat word to the council. He had never once been stepping back from the nothing of her. He had been standing between her and every cage in the world, including the cage of himself, and she had read it as rejection every single time, because rejection was the only language she had ever been taught to expect. She thought of the tower stair, his hand at the small of her back, of the way he had always waited on the wrong side of a chained door for a woman who could have refused him nothing, and let her refuse him anyway. She thought of him drinking silver in front of 600 wolves, rather than watch her lift a poisoned cup. Every cruelty a kindness wearing a coat, every cold distance a shield he had set between her and the world, and between her and himself. Because he did not trust even his own heart not to become one more thing that trapped her. And she had wept over each one of them as a wound. You stubborn, blind, self-destroying fool, Neris said, and her voice was shaking, and she crossed the room to him the way she had crossed it the night he refused her, and she took his ruined face in both her hands. Feel this. You cannot smell it, so you will have to feel it. Be still, and feel what comes through my hands, and then tell me again that circumstance did this. And she opened herself to the bond, the strange, terrible, wonderful thing that had been growing between them since the night she carried him out of that hall, and let it run the other way for the first time. Out of her and into him, through the press of her palms against his skin. Everything. The years of running. The night he came to her cold tower and called her silence peace, and undid her past all armor. The reckless want. The whole, vast, unhidden truth of what she felt, poured through the one channel a scent could never carry and a burned nose could never lose. It was everything at once, and it did not stop. She showed him the girl who had crossed a feasting hall, certain she was walking to her own humiliation. The woman who had knelt by his chair and been refused and called the refusal proof she was nothing, and the truth beneath them both. The truth she had been too afraid to say in words, even inside her own skull, that somewhere in the cold nights and the quiet of his company, she had stopped being able to picture a single day that did not have him in it. She held nothing back. For once in her hidden, guarded, char-scented life, Neris of Ravenmoor let another living soul see the whole of her, unlocked and undefended, and trusted him not to let it fall. She watched it hit him. She watched the Hound of Codmere, who had spent 30 years drowning in a roar of other people's hidden hearts and had never once been able to feel a single one from the inside. She watched him feel hers. His breath went ragged. His hands came up and closed hard over her wrists, holding them to his own face, as though if he let go the one true thing left in his silenced world would blow away. "Oh," he said, wrecked. Barely a sound. "Oh. It's real." "Real," she agreed, fierce and low. "Not circumstance. Not fear. Not the crown or the right or the old law. This, only ever this. And you do not get to drown it to spare me, because sparing me is mine to decide now. And I have decided. It is the realest thing I have ever known," said Neris. "And you will not throw it into the deep water to be noble. Do you hear me?" "I have been thrown in enough deep water for one life," he might have answered. She would never know what he would have said, because in that moment, the door of the little room banged open on one of the men Osric trusted with his life, white and breathless from a hard ride, and the world came crashing back in through it. "My king!" the man gasped. "The marchword has moved." Sabeth has told the whole court you are maimed past ruling, and the old law was cheated of the grey tide, and she is calling the great houses to set you aside and take the crown to steady the pack. And she has sent riders here, my king, for the both of you. To finish it, they are half a day behind me and no more. Nerys and Osric looked at each other across the small gold room, her hands still on his face, the bond still open and singing between them. To run again, forever, and be hunted the rest of their lives, or to go back to Greyhold and walk straight into the mouth of the thing that wanted them dead. We go back, Nerys said. Osric stared at her as though she had lost her wits, and perhaps she had. They will kill you the moment you pass the gate. They will try. But everything Sabbath is, and everything the Marchword has, rests on one single lie, 3 generations old, and the proof that unmakes it is sitting in a locked room under Greyhold that I have spent 3 days learning how to reach. She thinks the danger is a hollow woman she can drown. She does not know the danger is a paper. Nerys took his hand and let the bond carry her certainty into him, steady and bright. You taught me the whole court fears a right and a scent. I will teach them to fear the truth. Come home, my king. Let us go and be no one's ill luck ever again. They rode through the night and reached Greyhold as the great houses were gathering in the high hall to set their king aside, and they did not creep in by the tower or the servants' stair. They came through the great doors together, the maimed king and the woman the court had named the Grey Tide, into a hall that fell silent in rings the way it had on the first night she ever walked into it. Only this time she was not hiding. This time she let them all breathe her in, 600 wolves, and every one of them caught the clean, cold heather scent of a whole and living woman where the whispers had promised them a void. And she watched the certainty the Marchword had built its murder on come apart on their faces one by one. Halloran saw it first, because Halloran had spent a long life reading the old signs, and the rolls keeper went the color of ash. He, of all of them, knew what a true scent on a once hollow woman meant, knew there was only one force on earth that could lift the mark, that it could not be faked, and that its lifting was itself proof of a love so complete the law had no answer to it. He began, very quietly, to edge toward the doors. He did not reach them. That is not possible, said Sabeth, into the silence, and for the first time in 3 years her lovely voice was not steady. She is hollow. She is the Grey Tide. Halloran, tell them. But Nerys was already speaking, already crossing to the ancient iron-banded door that Wenna the maid, bless that brave girl, had left unbarred for her an hour before, already lifting out the brittle yellowed paper that 3 generations of Marchword lords had killed to keep buried. She read it out to the whole assembled court in a clear, carrying voice, the true muster of the traitor wars, the forged confession, the order in an old lord's own hand to burn Ravenmoor and drown its people and swear to the crown they had turned traitor, so that a house with no claim could keep a country full of silver. She read the name at the bottom of it. It was the grandfather of the woman standing at the front of the hall in silver, and the hall turned as one, and looked at Sabeth of the Marchword, and this time, the low tide of horror running through the room did not break around Nerys. It broke around Sabeth. Lies, Sabeth said, but the word had no weight left in it, and she looked around the turning hall for the alliances she had built, and found every face closed against her. Forgeries. She is Ravenmoor. Of course, she would forge, but the paper was old, and the ink was old, and the hand at the foot of it was known to every clerk in Caldmere from 100 honest documents, and there is a moment when a lie, 3 generations deep, simply runs out of ground to stand on, and the court watched Sabeth of the Marchword reach it. It was Lucan who called for the guard. Lucan, freed the instant the truth came out of a lifetime of a woman, steering him like a boat, his open face white, with a betrayal all his own. They took Sabeth and the old rolls keeper both. And when it was done, when the shouting had died and the great houses had seen the proof passed, hand to hand among them, Osric stepped up beside Nerys before the whole court and did the last thing anyone expected of a maimed and finished king. he knelt. He knelt to her in front of all of Caldmere, the man who could no longer smell a single soul in the room, and he held out his hand palm up, exactly as he had that first night on the feasting floor, when he had stepped between her and his brother and claimed her out of the crowd. And, though he spoke it to her, the whole silent hall heard every word. Not yours, not any. I am the first alpha in the history of this pack who will have to take his mate's word for it that she wants him, and go on taking it every day for the rest of his life, blind. Nerys of Ravenmoor, will you have a king who can only ever know you are true because you tell him so? And Nerys, who had spent her whole life being the thing the world refused, took the hand of the man who had chosen her with every sense that could have measured her, burned away. Full and bright and mutual at last, carrying her yes into him long before she said it aloud. I will, she said. You never needed the nose. You only never had to learn. And the hall that had touched iron when she passed, that had left her food outside a barred door and breathed grey tide on the chapel stair, that had watched a pack of hounds break around her like she was a stone set in a river, that same hall, 600 wolves of it, stood now in a silence of a wholly different kind, and could not look away from her, and no longer wished to. She had walked into Greyhold the first time, praying to be invisible in it. She stood in it now whole and named and chosen, impossible to overlook, and found she no longer minded being seen at all. They were married on the moor at Highfell when the heather came, with no court and no 600 wolves, and no one's eyes on them but their own. His scent never came back. The healers were not wrong. This once, the Hound of Caldmere would walk silent through a roaring world for the rest of his days, and rule his pack by his eyes and his ears and his wits, and the steady pressure of his wife's hand on his arm. 1 for friend, 2 for careful, 3 for we are leaving now. But a strange thing grew in the place where his old sense had died. Through the bond, and the bond alone, he could feel one soul in all the world, always, wherever she was in the castle, however dark the night. Not the whole roaring pack. Just her, the one silence that had ever given him peace, had become the one presence he could never lose. On the nights the pack ran the moon hunt without him, for a scentless alpha does not run the hunt. He would sit at the high window of Greyhold and close his useless eyes and find her, down in the hall, or out in the yards, or asleep in their own rooms, a single warm and certain point of her in all that silence. And he did not feel, on those nights, like a ruined thing at all. He felt like the one man in Caldmere who had been given the exact thing he had starved 30 years for. Not the roar of every heart at once, but one heart, only one. Chosen and sure, and his. They had each been, their whole lives, the very thing the world had decided to throw away. A void it could not read, a weapon it could not stop using. Neither had been anyone's first choice, or their second, or their 10th. And in the end, given every reason to walk away and be free of one another, they had turned around and chosen each other anyway, not for anything that could be smelled, or measured, or proven, but for the plain, unproven truth of who they were. Which leaves only one question, and I will leave it with you. When the whole world has already decided what you are, too much, too little, too strange, too broken, do you have the courage to let one person look past all of it and decide otherwise? And the far harder thing, when they do, will you let them? Tell me below. I read every one.